When I was 15, I was one of, and still one of, 6 grandchildren. And my grandfather followed in the footsteps of my great-grandfather, and they had a construction business in Albany, Georgia. My father and uncle followed in their footsteps, and of the 6 grandchildren, they pulled us all together and they said, who's interested in following in the footsteps? There were 4 females and 2 males. The males were the youngest of the grandchildren, the females were the oldest. Well, I was the only one interested in following in the footsteps. So they met over the course of a period of time. I honestly don't remember what that period of time was, but I do remember this conversation. My uncle, who recently passed away, sat down with me and very coldly and bluntly said, we're sorry, we're not going to continue in the business because you're a girl and you can't run a construction business and no one else is interested. So from the time I was 15 until they closed it 20 years ago, I'm 52, do the math. That was their plan, and they ceased the 3rd generation construction company because they didn't want the girl going into it. All right, so let's talk about, ladies, what that did to me psychologically. And Mike, I hate pointing that to you. What that did psychologically is you're not good enough. You can't play in the business world. That's what it did. So I went through high school and knew I needed to go to college. So I left, went to Georgia Southern, and I selected communications. Here's why. You don't have to take any business classes, and I can talk. So communications it was. Went through communications, finished school in about a 3-year time frame, and went to work at Lockheed. At Lockheed, I had several responsibilities. The one I learned the most from was I wrote speeches for President Ormsby, and we worked with the Department of Defense, we worked with the different entities in the Pentagon. That's most of the speech work that I did when working for him. The other thing that I learned was that presentation makes the biggest difference in the world. My Friday job, and some of you have heard this, was I was the plaque girl. What did that mean? Nothing to do with teeth. It was, here's the list of visitors that are coming next week. Here's the room with all the alphabetized plaques that they've ever received. We want you to see if a visitor has a plaque in the room, and we want you to rehang all the plaques that get you up to the executive level suites. So what would happen? United Way of Cobb County would come in, and their plaque would be hanging on the wall, and they were all so impressed that their plaque was hanging on the wall. Little did they know that it took all day Friday to do that. So presentation was one of the first things that I learned, messaging and presentation, from Mr. Ormsby. I left there and had a brief stint with an advertising agency, and it was brief. Not my thing. I did not enjoy the billable hour stuff because I felt like I was shortchanging people. I couldn't give them my undivided attention. Left and went to Georgia State University, and this is where my life changed. Was there for almost 10 years. Had a wonderful opportunity to work for Mike Mescon. Yes, that is Tim's dad, and I can tell you stories about Tim that are really interesting. But I spent many years working for Mike Mescon. The last 3 years I was there, they came to us and said, they being leadership, we want to put Georgia State University's business school on the map, and we think the way to do that, yes, we're accredited, is syndication. We want a nationwide syndicated professor that puts Georgia State on the map. And I said, and we would like for you to lead that effort, and we want you to work with Don Radicek. And Don Radicek is a lead economist, an economic forecaster. And so he and I were paired together. We're riding up in the elevator to the dean's office, and I guess time stops. I'm not real sure how all this occurred, but I remember it going really slow, and I remember this tall gentleman looking at me and saying, is there anything about what we're getting ready to do that bothers or concerns you. The communications person that I was taught to be is you never answer the question directly, you ask a question. I asked him the same question and he answered it. And he said, yes. He said, I don't like to talk to people. All right, nationally syndicated means you're going on a media tour and you do a lot of talking. You do a lot of storytelling. And for some strange and unusual reason, I guess this was my first moment of transparency, I remember saying to him, well, that's real good, because when you talk, I don't know what you're saying. And I didn't. I'd never had the business class. I'd always been taught to believe that girls can't do those things. So I started down the path with him where we were standing in an elevator looking at each other going, why are we doing this? And we struck a deal. And the deal was, Jane, if you teach me how to tell the story, I'll teach you economics. So for the next 8 months, every Wednesday, I spent 4 hours on the floor in his office, literally with textbooks and everything else, and Don Radicek taught me economics. And I spent about 45 minutes of that time period teaching him how to tell stories. We went on and we syndicated a national media tour. We did all the good morning shows for many years. He was syndicated in newspapers and you read about him and everything else. When I made the decision to leave and move into banking, coincidentally, I was sitting down, we were talking and just kind of catching up, and I said, Don, why did you do that? And this changed my life. He looked at me and said, I'm an orphan. Said, I was born and raised in the North in a private orphanage, and a gentleman came to me that owned the orphanage. That's what I mean by private. There was an owner of the orphanage. And said, Don, you're smart. This is a 6-year-old he's talking to. You're smart. If you will always do what you can do, I will make sure you go to the best schools available. And he did. If you looked at everything, he had Ivy League, undergrad, PhD, everything, multiples. And he turned around and looked at me and said, I see something in you that you do not see in yourself, and it was worth the investment. That changed my life. It taught me a lot about me, that not only do I understand economics, it's really not hard, and it's frighteningly repetitive. So that really began my business career. I had been recruited to go to work for Noonan Savings Bank in Noonan, Georgia, during a time frame in which, prior to the first banking, well, actually the second banking collapse, I don't count the one I wasn't alive for, my first banking collapse, how's that? And here's what I did at Noonan Savings Bank. I was responsible for working with the Economic Development Group, and we built the first trade-free zone in that area, recruited Yamaha and some other organizations to that area. I was responsible for the branch network because they didn't have anybody else and it just landed on me. And amazingly enough, for the real estate subsidiary called White Oak. And there I learned amazing things. How to build communities, how to work with EPA, how to create trade-free zones, how to translate and entertain, Koreans and Japanese and all of these foreign dignitaries that were coming in it was a whole new ball game at that juncture. I mean, this is years ago. And I also experienced the very first deregulation, where we're deregulated on this date. Wonderful little signature happens in Congress, wonderful signature on the president's desk, and regulation hit. And everything they wanted you to deregulate became illegal overnight. You couldn't have real estate subsidiaries. You couldn't have insurance subsidiaries. You couldn't do all of these things that they wanted you to do to protect income 2 days before. So I experienced the first deregulation and watched the collapse, watched the housing market collapse, watched the international scene collapse, all of those scenarios all around the swipe of a pen. It could have been prevented. Well, that's another topic for another day. But what it taught me was you can't take anything for granted, anything. And you can't rest on what you did yesterday because the rules of the game can change overnight. And they will change overnight at some point in your career. During this time frame, we had 6 different subdivisions that were under construction. I was continuing to manage, and this gentleman walked into my office one day, big bushy eyebrows. This is what I remember. Tall gentleman, big bushy eyebrows. And he sat down and he slid a newsletter across the table and said, "You wrote this?" And I said, "Yes, sir." It was an internal publication that went to our board and to our commercial lenders and some other folks like that. And it was basically an economic development publication. I had no clue how we got it. And he said, "I want you to come work for me." And I was busy and didn't pay him any attention. So he left and went on his merry way, and 2-3 months later came back, same scenario. Most recent publication, slides it across my desk, says, "I want you to come work for me." At this juncture, I'm intrigued, and I said, "Well, who are you?" He said, "I'm Casey Calloway." And I said, "Well, what would you want me to do for you?" He said, "Well, I have this project called Piedmont, and EPA is we have some issues with EPA around some flowers." This is real. There really are issues around flowers. And I said, "Well, okay, why would you want?" He says, "Well, you've been successful in moving these EPA issues to a different place. We had wetland issues and panther opportunities and another little purple flower opportunity. So you just deal with it. You provide additional locations and you work through those issues and you get your grants and you are allowed to build." So I relocated to Columbus, Georgia, and went to work for the Calloway family. Not for Calloway Gardens, not for Calloway Chemical, but for the Calloway family. Here's where I learned values, and that my values were different. And my value of people were different than their values of people. They had the innate ability, because of their money, to get anything done they wanted to do. But they couldn't work through an EPA issue because they weren't willing to form the relationships. And that's where I learned how important relationships are. And it changed my life. It was also the first time that I left a job because someone violated my values. And I couldn't stand to watch that happened, where I could see, and it wasn't vindictive, it wasn't ugly, it wasn't anything like that. I just couldn't stand to see people being used. So I left. I left and went into banking. I worked for South Trust Bank for a period of time, 11 years, and was one of the core group that jumped the river from Phoenix City into Georgia and formed South Trust Bank of Georgia. I did mergers and acquisitions. I ran the retail division, and I did everything but commercial lending, and you couldn't have paid me to have done that. So, but I learned a lot. I had the most incredible leader for the first time in my life that got it. You can find talent, you can hire talent, and you can turn them loose and get out of the way. I didn't know what I was doing in mergers and acquisitions, but I had this wonderful Don Radicek gentleman that taught me economics a long time ago, and all of that still held true. And I had a leader that said, "Go and do. Put together plans that you know that are going to work, and rely on the facts to know that they're going to work. And if you don't believe trends exist, they will repeat themselves, and you can take them to the bank." I can tell you trend stories over and over and over again. And David's in the back nodding his head at Carmike. Thumbs up. They will repeat themselves. So I worked in mergers and acquisitions for a period of time and learned an awful lot about a lot of things, and mostly about people and about leadership. I had my first really hard leadership lesson in that you'll see on the back of one of the handouts, that right half profile. Okay, there's one score that's a 65. Do y'all see what that is? Somebody tell me what it is. Flip it over, Chris. No, look down a little further. Verbal. Verbal. You'll see another score that's in the 30s that I don't like to admit to. 33, what would that be? All right. How do you think that plays out when you're a new manager? Yeah, that's good, Chris. Yeah. You're going to ask the hard questions, and you're going to keep asking them, and keep asking them, and keep asking them, and keep asking them. That's reality. That's my vice. I'm challenging. Everybody in the room that works for me is grinning from ear to ear. I'm sorry. It's reality. I'm challenging, and I'm verbal, so I'm going to say it. That was my first experience in management, truly managing a team to get them to go somewhere and go fast versus a lot of outliers. That was my first awakening to leadership. And leadership is dramatically different than managing. Dramatically different. Managing, you can put a plan out there, you can manage the plan and check it off. You can focus on what you've always done, which is that individual contributor stuff. And many of you in the room that I do know, and a few of you that are not here tonight, that I've had the pleasure of working with, are moving into your first real leadership jobs. And I want to talk a lot about this tonight. It's so different. And I wish I would have known then what I know now about the difference in management and leadership. And the single one thing that I've learned over the years from that experience of challenging and verbal to where I am today is it's not about me. And the day you truly realize when everybody that works around you and for you wins, the byproduct of you is winning. It's not about how I would have cut the cheese to make sure that the lovely little cheese plate looked different. It's not about that. It's about how Susie did it. And that Susie's may not look like James, but dadgummit, that cheese tray is beautiful and it's out and it works. Same thing in opening new accounts. They may form relationships different than I did, but guess what? It's still a new account. And that list goes on and on and on. But the hard part is getting to the place that you're willing to have that conversation with yourself. You're willing to say, what are my virtues and excess that become vices? You've got mine. There's my path. You see what my outliers are? I am both engaging and methodical. So let's talk about a curse for a minute. I see the vision, and I see the steps to get there. 4% of the world sees both of those. For the longest time, I just didn't understand why all these stupid people worked for me. It's not their problem. It's my problem. I'm the one that's the outlier. I'm the one that has to figure out how to tell the story so that every person goes on the journey. Every person. And that their raw talent is developed. And that their leadership gets to shine. For me, the beginning of every year, this is my message, and I have 4 bullet points. And those 4 bullet points, over and over and over and over and over and over again. I am so over it. By the time December gets there, it's not funny. True story. This year, in December, after meeting with the mission team, same message all year long. 3 people came up to me and said, this is cool. This, I can't believe. I'm so excited about where we're going. It's the same message. We started it in strategic planning in 2011. We continued to flesh it out. We continued to work on it, and I focused on it all year in messaging. What does that say? I have to continue to focus on it. I live at a different place than than everybody else does in the organization. And it takes repetitiveness. It takes changing how you tell the story. It takes looking at individuals and having very candid conversations with them. Okay, help me have a reality check. Did this make sense? Did this work? It takes reading your audience and making sure you're getting through to people. That's the hardest thing you can do in leadership, is being willing to admit you don't have the answers, your communication is not perfect, but your job is to move everybody to the same place. And that means you have to get real with yourself. That means you have to listen to people. One of the things that lights me up about young professionals, you'll give me your thoughts. You will share with me what you're really thinking. You're not worried about, I'm the CEO, you could care less about the title. You want to share what you see, what you think, and what you're interested in. So what does that do for me? Here's the selfish answer. It keeps my ears open. It helps me keep that message right. So don't think you're not already leading up. You are. You're leading up, and that's a really important skill to learn. It's a really important skill to master. Don't be afraid of walking in somebody's office because they have a title behind their name. Don't be afraid of networking in groups like this because there's a title. What you have to say helps us. David's nodding again. It helps us. You can't fathom how much it helps us. You are tomorrow. You're me. My job as a leader is to propel goodwill into the future, to sustain it. I can't do that operating in a vacuum. I can't do that thinking I have all the answers. If I'm not paying attention to tomorrow's donor, we're going to wake up in 10 years and there are no donors. All right, so be selfish a minute. When do I win? When we have donors. So I'm encouraging you to think about leadership from the standpoint of the influences of the people around you, as well as what do you do that gets in the way of everybody being on the same journey? Because we all get in the way. We big time get in the way. So what is your one thing that gets in the way of somebody else being the most successful that they can be? It's a hard question to answer. How many of you have ever had a leadership 360? I know some of you have because I've done it with you. Okay. How many of you want one? That hasn't had one, Chris? All right. How many of you have done the right path profiles? How many of you want to do one? All right, give me business cards and write on the back of it, 360 profile or both. Okay? Is that fair? All right, if you do it, do you promise to use it? All right. If Mindy and I, how many of you know Mindy Owens? She works with us. I know you do. You work with her. Mindy and I will set up a class if you're willing to come do the debriefs and do your own personal development plan. Y'all willing to do that? Okay. I got a loud yes. Who said the loud yes? So you got two loud yeses. Okay. Excuse me? At no cost, we just come and do it and develop our own plan. Yes, ma'am. Very cool. Yep. We will do that. Thank you. Does that work? Okay. Why? I would have killed at your age to know the things that I know about myself that I've learned in the last 8 years. I'll talk about leadership and the journey in Columbus for a minute. I left banking, went to work at Goodwill. Total ignorance is bliss, let me tell you. Total ignorance is bliss. I can share some amazing stories. The most eye-opening one was 2 weeks into the adventure. We had a fire drill. And I'm the last one back in the building. I always do that. Last one back in the building. And I walk in, and I look down, and there's this white bag of stuff laying on the floor. All right, active imaginations. Keep going. I pick it up and I look at it and I go, this is not sugar. So I called the chief of police, who was my buddy in Leadership Columbus, Ricky Boren. And I called Ricky and said, Ricky, I got this bag of white stuff. And I'm not real sure what to do with it. I really need to know what it is because every single one of my team members has just walked over this bag of white stuff from this drill, fire alarm drill. Ricky said, I got this little kit. Let me come over. So Ricky comes over. We're sitting in my office. Doors are shut. He gets out this little kit and he tests it. He goes, Jane, it's cocaine and it's good stuff. I said, good. Here, it's yours. So here's the reality of that. Every single team member in that organization, and at that point, 75% of them worked in Columbus, Georgia, had walked out that door and back in the door, and I was the last person in. What do you do? What do you do? You drug screen everybody. Guess how many team members I lost that day? How many? How many? 42%. 42% of the team members. Needless to say, we weren't quite a drug-free operation at that juncture in our lives. We are now. We gladly participate in the Chambers program and get our discount on our workforce premium, our insurance premiums. But that's hard decisions when you can't talk to anybody. And those lessons have continued. But what I know today is I get to live the secret job description that I wrote 15 years ago. And here's what I get to do. Because we've built an organization and a staff that does an amazing job that allows me to do the stuff that I'm great at. And I get to spend time in leadership development, internally and externally. I get to spend time on community relations, whether it's at a local level, whether it's at a state level or a national level. And I get to work in venues that will change the course of history going forward. What do I mean by that? There are 3 nationwide initiatives that we're a part of right now that are rewriting IRS guidelines for big businesses, that are looking at providing tax incentives for certain types of education to help the working poor. There are, who's a TSIS employee? NetSpin. You know those guys? Have you played on the website yet? We're working with them on a national opportunity right now and creating a new pay card. And it's going to be tested in a number of really cool environments. NetSpin, if y'all have not done it, number 1, they have a 4% savings rate, so use them. Number 2, it's a cool website where it's basically an ATM card. And they analyze your spending habits and they offer you financial coaching in an electronic format as they analyze your spending habits. It is phenomenal, and I'm serious. The last time I checked, is it still 4%? Are y'all 4% savings rate? That's non-existent. So I have great folks that have allowed me to do the things that I'm very, very passionate about. Things that are loads of fun and really matter. And they don't just matter for today, they matter for tomorrow. You also have one of these on the flip side of that blue and white piece of paper. And these are just some things I want to recap real quick, or just some lessons that I've learned the hard way. And I hope you can take some of them to heart and not go through a lot of what I've been through to learn the hard way. But to enjoy them and to embrace them. And the first one is be you. Don't be overconfident, but don't be scared either. God's got you on this journey for a reason. And He's not going to put you up against anything you can't handle. You just have to remember to go there first. You have to remember to draw on His strength and not yours, because I'm telling you, I wake up now, there have been days that I look and I look at where we've been and where we are today, and you just kind of go, oh my gosh, how did we get here? Well, it wasn't by my gifts and talents, it was by gifts and talents that have been shared. Leadership's not about you. Take that one to heart. It is not about you. It is about everybody around you. And being in the moment when they're sitting there. And that's hard to do. And the more stressed you get, the harder it is to do. Leaders go first. This one's hard to do too, because sometimes you just don't know what that path looks like, but you go first. If you're a true leader, you're going to go first. And you're going to go down that dark alley, and you're not going to have a flashlight, and you're not going to know what's at the end of it. And you're going to go, and you're going to go confidently, and you're going to go with wise decisions, and you're going to go with the facts. But you have to go first. You don't get to go second. And sometimes that's very, very frightening. But when it works, oh my gosh, there is no euphoria anywhere else in the world like it. Trust your instincts. You know those funny feelings when you have an encounter and you go, ooh, that just didn't feel right? Probably wasn't. That's what instincts are. Trust them. Sit down and figure out what didn't feel right and pick it apart and do something about it. Don't just let it stew. Get up and walk back down the hall and go, you know, that didn't go well. And don't allow it to not be settled, because your relationship with whatever, whoever, however that person is, the longer it stews, the more likely it is it'll never be repaired, and that fundamental to success called trust will be violated. Don't let it sit. Have a personal work system. How many of you have a personal work system? Okay, I'll hire you in the back with the hand up. I saw one hand. 2 hands. If you don't have a personal work system, get one. And don't ever hire anybody that can't tell you what theirs is. Why? Because they can't achieve closure. That simple. They chase shiny objects. Don't they, Carrie? 3-dimensional leadership. For us, relationships, results, and developing others. Are you a 3-dimensional leader? Do you develop people as you're doing the other 2 things that most everybody does today? We're looking for 3 things. If you don't have all 3, you won't be with us very long. Listen first and then ask powerful questions. And I've learned a lot about this as my job description has shifted in the last couple of years. My powerful questions now have to be in preparation with the individuals as they go to the meetings, because I'm not in the meetings anymore. So I have to help from a prep perspective versus being in the moment perspective. And that's a shift for me. It's a hard shift, but it's a reality shift. In order for the organization to be bigger and stronger and for them to be able to lead, I have to ask the questions to be sure that it's happening and the messaging is right, and then they have to deliver the message. That's a shift. It's a hard shift. It's a good shift. Emotional intelligence. How many of you know what an amygdala hijack is? How many of you know what the amygdala is? Okay. How many of you know what it really means to count to 10 and then open your mouth? An amygdala hijack is when you open your mouth before you count to 10 and those emotions raged out versus the fact and the logic. It's truly a chemical thing. Count to 10. Don't hijack. Steal others' ideas and give them credit. If you ride by our offices right now, you'll see these bright things all over the place, all over windows, all over cubes, all over cube windows. And that's an idea I stole from Carrie Finley this week. And her boss did it. I'm like, oh, that's cool. We need a lift. So everybody has bright markers, and they're writing all over the glass, and they're writing on the glass what is leadership to them, what's important to them. And it is really powerful when you ride by or walk by and you're reading these things. You can read some from the outside, some from the inside. And it is really amazing at how much fun it is, the conversation that it opens up in the building, and the laughter that it opens up in the building. The cool thing to me has been seeing the number of individuals that we provide services to that have their cameras, their phones out, taking pictures of the things on the windows. I had no idea that was going to be a byproduct of it. It was just something that I thought was a great idea that I stole from Carrie and her boss. So thank you for that. And then the last thing I want to say before we move to some questions is the very last favorite quote on there is something I want you to take and pick apart, because there's some big words in here that if you understand what those words look like, you can understand what true leadership is. Courage is one of them. You know, it's one thing to say, I made a mistake. It's another thing to stand up and say, I made a mistake. Here's what I learned from it. Here's how I'm changing my behavior. Not anybody else's, my behavior. The vision to welcome changes. Enthusiasm to motivate others, because that's what it takes. You've got to be willing to stand up and be enthusiastic about where you're going on the journey, which means you have to believe in it. The confidence to stay out of step when everyone else is marching to, I say, a different tune, because I don't believe there's a right or a wrong necessarily. I just believe there's different. So I encourage you to pick that apart and figure out what that looks like for you, and how to become more real and transparent with yourself, and put a group of people around you to say, okay, what is that single behavior that I do that derails you so you can't be successful? They'll tell you if they trust you. Nobody's telling you, and they tell you you're great, they're blowing smoke up your skirt. Everybody's got something. And once you figure out what that something is, get real about it. You can be an awesome, awesome leader once you know what it is. And I can assure you, everybody else around you knows. Don't let you think there's not anything.